Hey, this is the Last Coffee House. We are looking at, this is Sam Harris reading list. I don't know what number this is, but this is Terror and Liberalism by Paul Berman, published in 2003. And I'm going to precede this whole summary review type of thing by apologizing to Paul Berman. Because I wasn't a huge fan. I don't know. We'll get into it, and I don't know if it's a consequence of listening to this on audiobook as opposed to reading it in paper or digital form, but I listened to it 3 times all the way through. It's pretty short, so it wasn't a marathon. I didn't complete a triathlon or anything like that. But I just didn't get much out of it, you know? Like, I was trying, and I tried to take some notes, which my notes are pretty freaking hilarious, but I just didn't get much out of it. Here's, just to give you an idea, this is, like I said, it was published 2003. This is what Walter Russell Mead in Foreign Affairs said about it in 2003. Quote, Berman, one of America's leading public intellectuals, has written the first significant ideological contribution to the United States war on terror. This short and controversial survey introduces readers to the historical and intellectual links between the fascism of fanatical Islamist terrorism today and the totalitarian movements of the 20th century. Assembling evidence to show that the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood were steeped in the anti-liberal ideologies that shaped so much of 20th century history, Berman argues that the West faces yet another challenge from a pathologically irrational, blood-drunk ideology of hatred and reaction not unlike the Bolshevik and fascist outbreaks of evil. And actually, we'll get an end quote. This is like the whole blurb that was written by Mead in Foreign Affairs, so I just took the whole thing so you can get a full idea of what somebody had to think about it. Anyway, there were a number of differing critical responses, and it's in a context of the war on terror, right after September 11th, so there's a lot around this in an era that, I don't know, it baffles me when I look back on it. I was an undergrad during the Bush years, so the war on terror and all this, and I just, it was its own kind of hysteria, but it seems so patently not completely irrational compared to the kind of hysteria around Trump today. It's like, you didn't know you had it so good being able to protest against a war in the Bush era as opposed to protesting whatever you're protesting now every time Donald Trump says something that's unlettered on Twitter. It's a completely different kind of category, so it felt a whole lot better back in the day. But anyway, Berman seems he's mostly for it and slightly unhappy with Bush, as was the gist I got from when I listened to it. But like I said, I can't point to specifics. That's just what I remember thinking. Oh, this is what I think that this book is trying to say. Anyway, quote, looking back to anti-communist classics such as The God That Failed, in which leading ex-communists tell their stories of increasing disillusion, Berman attempts to reconstitute the tradition of Cold War liberalism in the context of the war on terror. The book's criticism of the Bush administration and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is scathing, but for Berman, Bush's shortcomings only go to show that the war on terror is too important to be left to conservatives alone. Berman's uncompromising attack on the Islamist death cult will not win him any friends on the Upper West Side, and his exposure of the moral failings and logical contradictions of many of Israel's fashionable critics will further alienate him from what remains of the organized American left. But this book will be remembered as an important contribution to the effort to understand the war on terror. It is not perfect, but it deserves, even demands, to be read, end quote. Okay, so to get to my notes, these are the notes that I took. These are the incredibly useful notes that I took. So the first time through, I took the notes, Iraq War, first and second, homeborn terrorists. So apparently referenced homeborn terrorists, people who sympathized, who were Americans who sympathized with the terrorist message or the Islamist message. He mentions Prometheus. I don't remember what context. I just put Prometheus here. Impulse to rebel. He talks about that impulse somewhat. I don't remember in what context. He talks about Abraham and Isaac. I don't know why. And apparently he's trying to find the source of terrorism. Okay. I don't remember what he thought the sources were or any criticism that I might have of that conclusion. The second reading, 1991 Gulf War. All right. You mentioned satanic verses. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm sure it's just the backlash on Salman Rushdie, but I'm not sure what context that was in. Talks about the instinct to rebel. Last time I said it was the impulse to rebel. This time I'm saying it's the instinct to rebel. Okay. A Baudelaire fleeing Christianity Christianity. Oh, I think this was... Oh, I was reading Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil at the time. That's why this stuck out to me. And I think him being persecuted by Christians endeared him a little bit more to me, because he was mostly... I have here a note pro-Satan, but I don't remember so much pro-Satan in the Flowers of Evil, but he certainly seemed to distance himself from religion in general, classical religion, and ideas, religious ideas, and kind of push it the other direction, and flirt with those more kind of, I don't know, like devilish or demonic or whatever untoward impulses. He had more interest in those kinds of things, Baudelaire. As I'm going along, I'll run into Baudelaire. He's one of the 100 books that I am reading in the top 100 books, so I'll get to him at some point, talk about it there. But anyway. And he talks, absolute freedom is the last thing I have no idea what that is referencing. So good job. Good on me for taking copious notes. My thoughts, like I said, I got nothing out of it. I know he was really looking at, and I didn't even have this in my notes, he talks about the roots of fascism and kind of connects fascist ideas to, like Western fascist ideas to Middle Eastern fascist ideas. He references The Rebel by Camus, and I haven't read it, but he introduced me to it, and it's on my list now. But it's an interesting topic. It's an interesting thing to try to do, is to connect fascisms of different ilks, because one of us is kind of a religious extremism, and then fascism on the other side would be the religion of a fascist, would likely be worship of the state or something like that. So it makes sense to connect them in some ways, and it would be interesting to connect Western fascism and Middle Eastern fascism, religio-fascism. I don't know. I didn't, nothing clicked out of anything that he had to say. Nothing clicked where I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, or anything like that. It just seemed so vague and open. So most of the time I had no interest. It seemed really kind of the time, and it was 2003. It's 2 years after September 11th, so it makes sense that it's really going to be shaped by this era and speak to this era specifically. But it was a liberal coming out in favor of the war, so that in itself is something pretty significant. And all through undergrad, I was anti-Bush. He was an idiot. Just not particularly lettered. He didn't have a whole lot of very intelligent things to say. He seemed, every time I watched one of his speeches, he seemed so childish. Even more so than Trump. And that's not to dogpile on Donald Trump. I mean, that's the whole thing about Trump, is that a lot of the criticism, the problems that I might have with Trump relate to the fact that I don't see that kind of a person being the kind of leader that the country needs, because Trump doesn't reflect who I am. I was an intellectual going through school. I wanted to read all the classics and read the philosophy and be up on epistemology and all that stuff. And that's just not Trump, not in any way, shape, or form. But does it necessarily take an intellectual to run a country? Does it necessarily take that? So much of the criticism is just he used the wrong word here or there or whatever else. And it's so much wolf crying that you have no idea when something is actually genuinely a problem versus not. And so, especially in this era, this era is absolutely ridiculous. So while I just don't like the person, and I don't think that is the proper way to be, who knows whether just simple, straightforward, kind of dull, dopey business person is the right kind of person to be running a country, who's just looking for waste wherever he can find it and cutting it out. And I certainly don't have a problem with, having seen all the waste that I've seen when it comes to government spending, I certainly don't have a problem with trying to rein that the hell in and figure out where this money's actually going. And I don't want this to become a rant, but I certainly, face value, I give the guy, I say, okay, go ahead, do what you're gonna do, and let's see if it works. And I leave it at that. So all I want to say is that so much of it could be that I don't think that Trump is an intellectual, so therefore he can't be a good president. And I can't take that a priori position just because that's my identity. That's not the way this stuff works. And just because somebody knows a bunch about Wittgenstein doesn't mean that they're going to be able to run a country. So, who knows? We'll see how it all turns out. But back to this book, it felt like reading it felt like a null book. It felt like something that I wasn't getting anything out of. And I know Sam Harris kind of approvingly referenced it in End of Faith, I think. That would make sense in the End of Faith. But he approvingly referenced it because it pointed out all the concerns over Islamism and the difference in ideas and the way that those ideas impact behavior and all that stuff. And I'm certainly on board when it comes to criticizing those ideas and being concerned about the impact of ideas ideas. I cannot wait to talk more about this, because this thing is so baffling to me. The way that Islam in general can be defended, but other things, other ideas, they consider those directly lead to action, even though they don't lead to action. And then other ideas, they will jump in between and say, no, these ideas aren't connected. It's related completely to, poverty or something like that. Oh my God, I can't even get started on that right now because it's so ridiculous. But anyway, so the book, this is Paul Berman. I don't think people need to read it in this era, but if you're interested in those war years and post 9/11, I'm sure it's got some good stuff in it. And there might have been great stuff about the links of fascism, linking different kinds of fascisms together. There might have been some great stuff in that I just missed, but I missed it. So that's just the way it is. And here we are, and that's the end of the podcast.